So we're spending a lot of time talking about NMOS this morning, and one of the very, very critical things is security. We have to make sure that the commands that are going around to control and monitor and configure our network are from authorized devices and users and everything like that. So that's what we're going to be talking about. Just a quick reminder for everybody, we are creating videos of all these presentations. They will be posted at vsf.tv, also on the VSF YouTube channel. And if you would make sure to get your badge scanned at the front desk, you'll be getting email with links to the PDF presentations and everything else like that. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Arne Bönninghoff from Riedel Communications, and he's going to talk us through security. So take it away.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Wes. And why do we actually do security? So over there and on here you see the Media Node Maturity Checklist published by the EBU, and it basically describes the user requirements. And you see that security is in the bottom, in the base layer. And securing the open APIs like ISO 4, ISO 5, all the NMOS APIs are actually really important, but the adoption is not quite there. But I just want to show that the best practice of how you do it is actually there, and that the NMOS APIs can easily be secured. So the types of traffic I'm talking about is control devices to nodes. This could be a broadcast system, broadcast control system that connects to end devices for ISO 5 connection management. Control devices to servers like the ISO 4 registry. Nodes to servers, so a ISO 4 based device would register all its resources secured. And nodes to nodes, there's also traffic going on. We also want to secure that. And levels of security. Just a quick theoretical introduction here. You have confidentiality, that the data passing between clients and the API is unreadable to third parties, and you're not vulnerable to man-in-the-middle attacks. Identification, so the client can check whether the API it's interacting with is owned by a trusted party. So broadcast control system issues a command to a device, but the device is actually not the device that the broadcast controller thought it would be. Integrity, so the data traveling back and forth is not tampered with, also what happens in man-in-the-middle attacks. And authentication and authorization for the checking that it's actually authorized to put an action into place. And the work areas of AMWA in the BCP-003, which stands for Best Current Practice, is actually 3 parts. So the first one is establishing trust. So it describes the public key infrastructure, which covers then the identification bit, and explores how this can be used in a broadcast environment. Then the second bit is connection security. So how do we actually encrypt the NMOS data? We do this with TLS because ISO 4, 5, 6, 8, and 9 are based on RESTful HTTP APIs, so it's relatively easy to use TLS. But the BCP describes the Cipher suits that are suited. And the third part is the client authorization bit. So once you have an encrypted stream of control, you can still add a second application layer that the end devices or the registry can check if a command that is coming encrypted is authorized to be processed. The first bit is covered in BCP-003-1, and the second bit is covered in BCP-003-2 and the IS-10 API, which is also work in progress of AMWA. Key exchange, establish trust. So why do you do that? Imagine you have a conversation and you want to say something secret, and but you cannot see the person. Of course, then the other person has to identify, here's my certificate, and you can validate. So you use that in voice over IP for a long time, and this is how the TLS encryption then works. The top part is called the PKI, the public key infrastructure, and then the encrypted message is commonly known as HTTPS, and TLS is the encryption scheme. To this to happen, we need DNS. So if you browse to a web page, I took the EBU web page, and you see it's HTTPS, and over here, and you have the log symbol, so you know every interaction from the browser to the web server is encrypted. And if you check in your browser and you show the certificate, then you see it's a valid certificate, and it was issued for the host name. So it's not issued for the IP address of EBU's web server, it's issued for the host name. And so this is why the DNS resolution of broadcast devices is essential for this to work. Of course, you could issue a certificate for an IP address of a IP-based camera, but this is not recommended and standard in published best practices for TLS encryption. So this is a screenshot of the NMOS Explorer of Riedel, which you can download for free, and this was taken in a workshop we did recently in the summer in Montreal at CBC Radio Canada. And you see, if we don't use DNS resolution, the NMOS nodes, they show up with their IP address. But if we have a DNS workflow in place, like is proposed in the TR 1001-1 recommendation, you see that all the devices, this is a software audio sending and receiving device. We also have a Sony AWS device in here. They are all identifiable with a host name, so that you can have a certificate authorization server which issues certificates to that particular host name. It adds a level of security. Talking about certification authority, this is what you need to have, and what does it do? So it needs to be in your network, and all the devices, clients and servers and nodes need to be able to connect to it. And it has usually a root certificate in there. It can be a public one, so I showed you the EBU website before. It has a, your web browser usually has a connection to the internet, so that your web browser, being the client in this case, can connect to a public certification authorization authority to check and validate the server certificate. If you have it locally, you can import the server certificate onto clients and servers. And the client and server relation, I have an example for ISO 4. You have the controller connecting to the registry to pull out all the data, and you have the NMOS nodes, as they are commonly known now, connecting to the registry to push all their resources. In this case, the server needs to generate the key pair to distribute and have the server certificate. If you look at ISO 5, it's the other way around. So you would have the key pair and the server certificate in the node, because the controller opens up the connection to the server. So in this case, the end device, like a camera or an intercom system, would be the server. So you need to have the server certificate on there and the key pair generated for that server's host name. BCP-003-1 then looks at Cipher suites, and courtesy to BBC R&D, Simon Rankin did a lot of work in here, and I'm just showing you the results. So what the devices should support as Cipher suites is in here, and to have maximum interoperability between devices, there was the notion to have one Cipher suite that every device in the network supports, so that you don't have the problem that you want to encrypt the traffic, but the Cipher suite that the client supports is not supported by the server. Now, in the workshop that we did in July, we had the discussion, maybe it is not good to dictate one Cipher suite because not all the platforms, operating systems, and libraries used by different vendors had this particular Cipher suite available. So we did a quick lookup which Cipher suites were actually supported by all the vendors. So these are the most supported ciphers. They are not particularly safe, so there's other Cipher suites that are more secure, but these were supported by all. But just to mention, there were only 4 implementations in this list, so we need more input there to continue and to decide if it is possible to have one Cipher suite that needs to be supported by everyone. So the conclusion bit here is broadcast devices need to be able to import root CA certificates from trust servers, as well as import or generate key certificate pairs to be able to encrypt messages. Broadcast devices need to support a range of required Cipher suites then. A broadcast controller needs to trust root CA certificates, so you also need to be able to import that in there. And you either have a local certification authority or you have internet access. So that's a larger topic there for broadcast structures. If you want to have a closed-up system, like a lot of broadcasters want, you still have the possibility to have the local certification authority in there. There's software available to do that, and then you generate your certificate locally for your domain or for your domains and issue the certificates on the devices. You need to have the DNS workflow, which you should have anyways if your devices and control systems follow TR1001. And so leaving the Cipher suite topic aside, the security implementation is pretty simple for end devices, but the infrastructure there is more challenging. So if you want to have a secured infrastructure, it requires early planning how you do it, and you better do it before you start building the network, because then adding security workflows afterwards might be challenging. So you have your CA, DNS, DHCP. Of course, you need to plan that right from the beginning. And the conclusion of the workshop we did was we still need more participation. So we have a good baseline there. We have a lot of ISO 4 and 5 or 8 devices out there, but we need more participation in TLS encryption. So what is BCP-003-2 or IS-10 and IS-10? So it follows the question, or it's like a user story, user demand. As a user, I want my main control system to be the only system being authorized to query the network for ISO 4 resources. So you don't want anyone to connect to your network and just see, oh, it's so interesting what devices are in your network. And the second part also, as a user, I want my main control system to be the only system being authorized to make connections. So you also don't want someone use an open source NMOS tool and stop all your receivers from receiving streams, so you don't have your main feed is gone. So BCP-003-2 describes techniques how to retrieve a token and get authorized access, and describes techniques for NMOS nodes how to validate those tokens, and the type of information stored in the token. So how to become authorized? I have this little example I did for the presentation on NAB. So imagine you go into a hotel, and this is the setup for IS-10. You have an authorization server, you have your NMOS nodes, which could be your end devices, and the NMOS controller. If you compare that, you have your hotel lobby, and you have your rooms, and you want to get in there. So at first you need to identify, and then you get a token. So you get your chip card, which stores specific information so that you can have access to a particular room. And it's basically the same workflow, a little bit adapted. Then once you have the token, so in a broadcast infrastructure, you would log in with your username and password, you get the token, and then the control system can make the IS-5, IS-08 patch requests and send over the token. And it's basically the same with the hotel door. You have to put the token there before it opens, and the node, the NMOS node, would then retrieve the token in the patch request, validate it, and then say, okay, I will stop and start, or I don't do it if there's no token or bad token. IS-10 and BCP-003-2, they specify OAuth 2 and JSON Web Tokens. This is industry-proven techniques. So if you connect your Facebook account to another app on your phone or use Google, it's the same techniques here. So it's nothing new, nothing special. And the authorization server issues those keys to resource servers, and the authorization server issues tokens to clients. What does a JSON Web Token look like? It's an encoded bit which just travels in front of the payload of your ISO 4 or 5 or 8 payload. And if you decode it, it has a header, a payload, and the signature that you can verify against. And the payload part is the interesting bit, because there you can define the scope. So what is actually the token able to unlock? And then the work in progress bit right now is the, I think there's something mixed up in here. How granular do we specify the scope of the tokens? Is it per NMOS API? Is it per vendor? Is it per NMOS version? And you can put a lot of granular authorization schemes in there. At a certain point, the token gets quite large, and then the packet gets quite large, and there's some limits, technical limits. And again, there is the opportunity here to collect the user requirements from you as the users, what you actually want to have in there, and to also work in BCP-003-2 right now. So you could also think about locations. So user logs in and he can only see devices in gallery A and not in gallery B. Or the admin, of course, he can do everything. And the audio operator can only operate audio devices, but not the video devices. But he might be able to see all the video devices. So this is stuff that you can do there. So how does it fit into the NMOS world? Authorization server is visible through DNS SD, so it uses the same discovery mechanism as the registry. So if you have a DNS workflow in place, you just add the next service for, it's called _NMOS-auth, and then you find the authorization server. And it's backwards compatible, of course. If there's devices that don't support it, you just don't send the token with it. And it's also applicable for ISO 4, like I said before. You have certain devices that are allowed to query the NMOS registry, and some others that might not be able. And some real-world considerations. So this is now talking about security and the TLS like before. The exchanges take some time. So if you have TLS encryption, and you don't keep up your connection, this TLS handshake takes a bit more time. So time-sensitive commands that you have in place maybe today take a little bit more time. We made some measurements, but it's not extremely more. So you are still in the millisecond range for connection and a patch request. Automating certificate handling and key exchange is a vulnerability. So to have this workflow described for BCP-003-1, you need to put the certificates on all your cameras, vision mixers, intercom system. And the most secure way, of course, would be to open up all those user interfaces and import it manually. That's not really flexible if you have remote operations and you have rental cameras that you want to integrate for a weekend. So, of course, you could automate that. There could be an API endpoint to retrieve a certificate, but then this is a security hole, which could be used by malicious, yeah, how do you call them? Yeah. malicious intrude. But don't let that additional effort stop you from implementing security best practices. So I think it's right now a good time to think about security. We have a lot of customer installations that are in place, and they now want to add security workflows, which is quite a step. So if you plan on something, you should really consider this. Conclusions, ISOX are based on standard IT technology, and HTTP and JSON are used by many other applications. So OAuth 2, they already exist in large scale. So the key exchange workflow provides the fundamental environment for HTTPS transport, and secure transport enables OAuth 2. I missed that before. So if you only want to have authorization, but you don't have the whole TLS encryption, this JSON Web Token travels totally plain text unencrypted, and you can use a web-based JWT decoder to read what's in there. You can just copy it, and then you have your security hole. So you definitely need TLS encrypted transport before you have your authorization. And the TR 1001 workflow is a must. So you need to have the DNS resolution available in your network for all the devices. We had a workshop in June, which was a virtual workshop. So AMWA has tested this time to have a VPN server in the cloud. Everyone could connect, so Sony guys connected from Basingstoke, we connected from Wuppertal in Germany, US guys from the US. And in the VPN, we had the TR 1001 set up, we had a certification authority, we had a secured registry implementation and an authorization server. Should be still online. So Thomas Edwards from Disney, he's chairing these efforts, and if you want to join, become AMWA member and be active. Thank you.
Thank you, Arne. So we have time for a couple of questions. If anybody has any, yes, hold on.
Hi. So you're saying that there will be delays, that things take time. Those delays deterministic? Do they vary? Do they vary each time for the same type of device, or is it that type of device is always going to be that sort of delay?
No, it's deterministic. So it depends on the library you use. So, for example, we have a certain development environment where we have a certain library that generates those TLS packets, and we know then that adds, let's say, 20 milliseconds. That's each time. So it doesn't really vary. It's just for example, if you post your resources, so a device connects, finds the registry, and it posts then the node, then the device, and all the senders, receivers. So for each post, it takes a little bit more time because there's every time this handshake. So the registration time of that device takes longer. But once it's registered, the patch commands, of course, they also take a little bit more time, but it's not significant that you would, it's not a difference from 1 minute to 10 minutes or something. So, yeah. And I can speak for other vendors. So there could be other vendors where it takes then 30 milliseconds or 10 milliseconds. So it really depends on the software library that does the encryption.
Okay. Anything else? I had a question actually. Is the certificate infrastructure that is required, is that compatible with single sign-on technologies that are used in a lot of corporations and things like that?
Sure, yeah, that's just a layer on top. And if you're thinking of this, we have tested in the lab. So this is authorization server where you then need to log in. Of course, you can connect that to your Active Directory or to other single sign-on practices, yeah.
So you can make it pretty seamless to your entire business operation?
Yeah, if you want that, yeah.
Yeah, that would make it pleasant, I think, for some big organizations that spend a lot of time keeping Active Directory going. I know that's a
Sure. Then that's why I had the picture of the IT Crowd series in there. Of course, then you are connected to your IT department of the company, which makes things maybe slower, maybe quicker, but you still then have other benefits then, of course.
Anybody else? Okay, thank you very much.